Okay, let's dive right in. Welcome to this YouTube explainer on aplastic anemia and bone marrow failure syndromes. Today we're undertaking a highly structured, smart revision of exactly what happens when the body's cellular factory completely shuts down. If you're prepping for exams, or you just want a foolproof way to master this really complex topic, you are in the exact right place. We're going to strip away all the noise and focus purely on the high-yield facts, using this deck to build a rock-solid mental map.
To make this the ultimate revision tool, we're going to strictly follow this agenda. We've got 6 sections. 1. The bone marrow factory. 2. Inherited marrow failure syndromes. 3. Acquired aplastic anemia. 4. Clinical signs and symptoms. 5. Diagnosis and severity criteria. And 6. Treatment and management. We're moving ruthlessly from the basic definition all the way down to management.
But before we get into the heavy clinical criteria, I really want you to think of your bone marrow as a factory. Ask yourself, what kind of clinical disasters unfold when it suddenly fails to produce its 3 main products? Those products, of course, being red cells, white cells, and platelets. When this production line halts, you don't just get one symptom, right? You get a cascading, multi-system crisis. Understanding this fundamental concept is absolutely key to locking down everything else we're about to cover.
Section 1. The bone marrow factory. Cellular breakdown. So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding that aplastic anemia isn't just about having low red blood cells, despite what the name anemia might lead you to think. It's actually a true pancytopenia. This means all 3 major cell lines are depleted, resulting from severe hypoplasia of the bone marrow. The factory floor is literally empty. And what fills up that empty space? Fat. Over 75% of the marrow is replaced by fat spaces. There's a massive reduction in the hemopoietic pluripotential stem cells, rendering the marrow entirely unable to populate the blood.
Moving on to Section 2, Inherited Marrow Failure Syndromes, Faulty Blueprints.
Now, what if the factory was built with a faulty genetic blueprint right from the start? There are several classic congenital bone marrow failure syndromes. These are incredibly important to distinguish because they're characterized by systemic clinical features that go way beyond just having low blood counts. You've got Fanconi anemia, marked by pancytopenia and skeletal defects. Then Dyskeratosis congenita, caused by a telomerase complex mutation that leads to dangerously short telomeres, plus skin or nail changes. There's also Diamond-Blackfan anemia, which is essentially a selective red cell aplasia linked to ribosomal biosynthesis defects. And finally, Shwachman-Diamond syndrome, which also involves ribosomal defects but often presents alongside pancreatic issues. And this brilliantly illustrates the classic presentation of Fanconi anemia. Take a really close look at these x-rays. You can clearly see the classic absent thumbs. Then over on the other side, an intravenous pyelogram shows a perfectly normal right kidney, but the left kidney is abnormally placed way down in the pelvis. Fanconi anemia has a recessive pattern of inheritance linked to DNA repair defects. So, in an exam scenario, if you see a patient with pancytopenia who also has skeletal anomalies like absent thumbs, growth retardation, or abnormal kidneys, Fanconi should instantly be your top differential. It is a super high-yield visual.
To keep your categories straight for your revision, mentally contrast Fanconi with Dyskeratosis congenita. Fanconi is driven by mutations in DNA repair genes, causing those skeletal anomalies and carrying a really significant risk of cancers like head and neck squamous cell carcinomas later in life. Conversely, Dyskeratosis congenita is a failure of the telomere repair complex. These patients present with short telomeres, nail dysplasia, and oral leukoplakia.
All right, Section 3, Acquired Aplastic Anemia, Outside Sabotage. When we look at acquired aplastic anemia, there's a pretty staggering reality. At least 2/3, so around 67%, of these sporadic cases are completely idiopathic. The underlying pathogenesis here is an autoimmune process. Essentially, your own oligoclonal cytotoxic CD8-positive T cells go rogue and attack the hemopoietic stem cells right in the marrow. We also see a decrease in T regulatory cells, which, usually keep this kind of friendly fire in check.
For the remaining 33% of cases, you absolutely must memorize these secondary triggers. The marrow can be directly damaged by radiation or cytotoxic drugs like busulfan, but pay special attention to the idiosyncratic drug reactions. These are rare, completely unpredictable wipeouts caused by drugs like chloramphenicol or gold. Viral infections are also major culprits here. Parvovirus is famous for causing transient aplastic crises by basically switching off erythropoiesis, and seronegative hepatitis is another classic trigger you need to know.
Section 4. Clinical signs and symptoms. Spotting the signs.
As a medical detective, the smartest way to remember the presentation is by using the rule of threes for pancytopenia.
Because all three cell lines are down, the symptoms group into three clear categories. First, red cells are down, so you're going to see classic anemia symptoms, profound fatigue, and pallor. Second, platelets are down. That's thrombocytopenia, meaning the patient presents with spontaneous bruising, bleeding gums, or epistaxis, which are nosebleeds. And third, white cells, specifically neutrophils, are down, which leads to severe, recurrent infections, particularly in the mouth and throat. Now here's a massive point. You typically do not see enlarged lymph nodes, liver, or spleen in these patients. If you see organomegaly, actually scratch your initial thought and rethink your diagnosis.
Which brings us to Section 5, Diagnosis and Severity Criteria, locking the diagnosis.
To officially lock in a diagnosis of aplastic anemia, you need to see at least 2 of the following peripheral blood cytopenias. We're looking for hemoglobin below 100 grams per liter, neutrophils below 1.5, or platelets below 50. You also won't find any abnormal leukemic blasts in the blood. But the definitive proof? That's the bone marrow trephine biopsy. A simple aspirate just isn't enough. A solid trephine core biopsy is absolutely critical here to prove the marrow is genuinely empty. It demonstrates a severe lack of megakaryocytes and confirms that the hemopoietic tissue has been replaced by over 75% fat.
You are definitely going to want to screenshot this table right now. These are the modified Camitta criteria, and they literally dictate the entire management pathway. Look at the threshold for severe aplastic anemia. Marrow cellularity under 25%, plus at least 2 of the following: neutrophils under 0.5, platelets under 20, or reticulocytes under 20. But notice the crucial distinction for very severe disease. The criteria are exactly the same, except the neutrophil count drops perilously below 0.2. At that level, the risk of life-threatening infection is catastrophic.
And finally, Section 6, Treatment and Management, Clinical Protocols.
Treatment for bone marrow failure is highly algorithmic. You're stepping up in 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 is purely supportive care. You stabilize the patient with red cell and platelet transfusions and aggressively treat any fevers or infections because of that extreme neutropenia. Phase 2 steps up to immunosuppressive therapy, aiming to reset the rogue immune system. And Phase 3 is the ultimate escalation, allogeneic stem cell transplantation, where we literally try to replace the faulty factory altogether with healthy donor cells. If your patient is taking the pharmacological route, maybe because they aren't a candidate for a transplant, this specific triplet is your high-yield combination to memorize. We use antithymocyteglobulin, or ATG, combined with cyclosporine. Together, these intensely target and suppress the autoimmune T-cell attack on the marrow. We also add L-trombopag, which is a TPO receptor agonist. Not only does L-trombopag stimulate platelet production, but it's actually been shown to promote a durable, tri-lineage improvement in overall blood cell counts. That's a real game changer.
The toughest clinical decision here is choosing between a stem cell transplant and immunosuppression. The rule of thumb is heavily dependent on age and donor availability. You must weigh these factors carefully. Young patients, generally those under 35 years old, who have an HLA-matching sibling, get the curative allogeneic stem cell transplant. It's the gold standard and really the only cure for those constitutional marrow failure syndromes we discussed earlier. On the flip side, older patients, or those who lack a matched donor, generally rely on the immunosuppressive regimen, because the mortality risks associated with transplantation at an older age just become way too high.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really thought-provoking concept. We are increasingly mapping the exact somatic mutations driving these acquired cases, like PIIGA, BCR, and RUNX1, and the germline DNA repair defects in congenital cases. As precision medicine advances, it leaves us with a fascinating question. Will targeted gene editing like CRISPR eventually replace the immense risks of allogenic stem cell transplants as the ultimate cure for bone marrow failure? It's an absolutely incredible frontier in hematology to ponder before your next exam. Thank you for joining me for this smart, focused revision. Keep studying hard, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.